Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 23 playthrough of the Colorado Rockies. We are in August of 2049, and you may be saying to yourself, if you watched our previous episode, wasn't it July 1st when you last checked in with us, Mr. Old School Sports? And if you are saying that to yourself, you are correct. I had done an hour plus episode that covered everything from July 1st to August 12th. And as I was trying to save that episode, it crashed and disappeared forever before I was able to save it. So this will be a somewhat briefer recap of everything that went on in the month of July and early August. Don't need to wait for the punchline. You can see the Rockies are 60 and 66 at this point, 12 and a half games back. Still doing okay with our upgrade at catcher. Ownership pleased with the fact that we signed Jamal Cohen to an extension. And a little upset that we aren't playing 500 ball, but given the mediocre team that we have and some extreme injuries at time that we've been dealing with this season, I'm not disappointed with that result. So in this episode, we're going to kind of focus on a few trades that we made on July 1st, international amateur free agents and the result of that, what happened in terms of the All-Star game, what happened in terms of the draft, and then what we did in terms of trades, both trading players away and bringing players in as we approached the trade deadline. Again, it's not going to be a real long episode. Obviously, you know how long it is if you clicked on it because it shows you that right on top on YouTube. But I don't know how long it's going to end up being at this point, but it's certainly going to be shorter than the hour-plus episode that I worked on earlier this morning that is now disappeared into the ether of the universe forever. So we started off the month of July with three minor trades. Most relevant was picking up 25-year-old pitcher Tyrone Colbert from the Tigers. Thought that he looked like an interesting prospect. He's been pretty miserable, quite honestly, over the course of his career with a 5.26 career earned run average. But he is a ground ball pitcher who throws reasonably hard with good movement on his pitches. And we thought that that was a template that might work well in Colorado. The Tigers also weren't looking for a ton for him. They did retain 35% of his contract. Not too relevant. He's not making a lot of money. $1.6 million this year. His arbitration next year number is about $2 million. But we didn't have to give up anyone who was crippling to us. Gave up Jose Gordillo, a first baseman, kind of a guy, potentially that home run power could be useful in Colorado. Don't love low work ethic players, though. John Cabeza, a minor league pitcher, decent prospect, but didn't think he was going to play well in Colorado with below average movement and being a fly ball pitcher. So we're fine moving on from him. Mark Peterkin, who we picked up at the beginning of the playthrough in a trade last fall, thought he was a decent fourth outfield prospect, but again, for a guy who we think could be a major league starting pitcher, didn't mind including him. Esteban Ampuero, kind of similar, fourth or fifth outfielder, like the speed, like the personality, just not sure if he's got the bat. And then last but not least, another outfielder, Alfredo Santana, another guy probably a fifth outfielder. So to pick up a guy who we thought could be a contributing starter for us down the line, we thought that was a good trade. We also picked up Mario Rodriguez, a reliever, very similar profile, good movement on his pitches, ground ball pitcher, throws pretty hard. We've had him stashed in Albuquerque so far, where he started 5 games for us with a pretty sickly 7.66 ERA. Making a good amount of money. He's a major league veteran at this point, but the Rays were willing to hold on to 95% of his contract. So we basically got him for very low money the next couple of years. And then last but not least, we traded minor league center fielder Daniel Rincon just a guy with a bad personality we wanted to get out of our system for minor league center fielder Jose Donoso, who started with us in Albuquerque. And because we are still dealing with a crazy number of injuries, particularly in our outfield, he's now in the majors where he's 2 for 9 in 2 games, but a good personality, kind of a 4A player. That was addition by subtraction, just getting a negative personality out of our farm system. So none of those trades, I think, are going to move the needle exceedingly on what this team looks like down the line, but I felt like with both of the pitchers, could be guys who make our staff the next few years and contribute as we try to move on from some higher paid players potentially this offseason. You may remember from the end of our final episode that we made an offer to the guy who we thought was the best international amateur free agent, Joel Bueno, and he did end up signing with us on July 3rd. Our concern with him was that we only had an average scouting report. You can see our scouting accuracy is now up to high, and he still profiles as a player with excellent contact, really good home run power, good gap power, and somewhat above average eye and avoiding strikeouts if he completely develops. Loved the fact that he had good work ethic, high intelligence. 16-year-old, probably going to be in our international complex for the next couple of seasons, but also very possible that he's going to be one of the top prospects in our system in the not-so-distant future. And taking a quick look at our player development, 15th minor league system in all of baseball at this point, but I think with the addition of Bueno and then some of the guys who I'm going to talk about that we picked up in the draft, hopefully that's something that will start moving in a better direction over the next couple of seasons as we continue to heavily invest in both scouting and player development. So then we moved on to the All-Star game, and the Rockies have been kind of 4 to 6 games under 500 for the entire summer. So our record wasn't substantively different a little over a month ago when the All-Star rosters were announced than it is today. And I was shocked, positively shocked, to find out that we had 6 All-Stars on the Colorado Rockies. And when I show you who those 6 All-Stars are, you're probably going to be shocked too. One was Juan Vargas. He is a perennial All-Star who joined us this year at the age of 34. But his record now stands at 8-8 with a 5.34 ERA. He actually had a losing record when he made the All-Star team, and his ERA was a little bit higher than it is now. So that was surprising. I mean, this is a guy who we signed to what I think will be a pretty good contract, $10 million this year, $8 million next year, and then $6 million options each of the last 2 seasons. So I think we've got really nice optionality with him. Great in the clubhouse, and another ground ball pitcher with good movement. Gonna try to see how that works in Colorado over the coming weeks, months, and seasons. But we're very surprised that he was an All-Star. And then we had a second All-Star in our pitching staff, or on our pitching staff, but he is no longer with the team, so we will talk about that shortly. And then 4 position players ended up being All-Stars. Victor Gonzalez, the catcher that we traded for, hitting .266 this year with 18 homers. Not a shock to see him. He is a veteran, second All-Star appearance of his career. He's also a 2-time Silver Slugger winner in the past. So glad that that home run power seems to have translated pretty well into cores, where it looks like he's hitting a home run every 21 at-bats or so for us. Another All-Star, Jamal Cohen. This one was really good to see. This is a veteran who's had some monster seasons for Colorado over the years, who we recently signed to a 4-year extension, which management, actually ownership, wanted us to do. And you can see another somewhat team-friendly deal. He's going to be making 15 each in the next couple years. Then we've got team options after that. But given that we're unlikely to be a 500 team, and that's one of ownership's key goals, figured that getting a pretty good player signed that they wanted signed made sense. And he is a very legitimate all-star, hitting 274 this year, 35 homers, 104 ribbies. Check in. I think some of those numbers are near the top of the league. Yeah, 35 home runs is tied for second in the NL, and the 104 ribbies is second in the NL. So it was not shocking to see him as an all-star. One that really made me feel good, shortstop Juan Castillo, a bit of a reclamation project that we picked up from Pittsburgh. He had been kind of trending in a pretty negative direction in his second and third years with Pittsburgh after a really nice first season in Pittsburgh in 2046, after we had picked him up from the Dodgers when we traded away our longtime star Isaiah Hill when he started making too much money. But Castillo having a really nice season, 293 batting average, 18 homers and 71 ribbies. Resurgent campaign for him. Would honestly prefer him at second base rather than short. And, for the long term, that's something that we'll need to figure out. The thing that I do like about Castillo is that although Coors is certainly helping him, he's hitting 314 at home with 8 home runs. He's still hitting 273 on the road with 10 homers this year. So it's not just a complete Coors effect for the resurgence in his career. And then last but not least, Andrew Booker, a first-time All-Star this year and the 6th Rockies All-Star. 340 batting average, that was higher. He was leading the league in the 350s back when he was named an All-Star. 22 homers, 80 ribbies. 24-year-old player making the major league minimum. I don't love his personality, but at this point, he's pretty fully developed. We know what he is. He's got a little speed. He can bunt a little bit. I think he's going to be a pretty important player for us over the next couple of seasons. Once he starts making bigger money, probably will look to move on from him, given that we don't love the influence in the clubhouse. And he's also fragile, but certainly a very productive bat for us. So was surprised to have 6 All-Stars. The 4 position players I get, the 2 pitchers who were named All-Stars, one of whom I know I haven't even talked to you about yet, were definitely shocking to me. And I spent a lot of time in the episode that will not be named, that disappeared, on the draft, and what I turned into an excruciating decision for our number 11 pick in the draft. I'll get into the guy that we picked shortly, but want to show you the 2 guys that we were thinking about in that spot. So you can have the opportunity to let me know if you think I should have gone in a different direction or not. You know that I'm always going to be looking at a pitcher in the first round if at all possible. If you look here, there were no pitchers off the board when we were picking, so we had our pick of the litter. It just turned out that this draft was a little bit of a down year for pitchers, in my opinion, and a pretty good year for hitters, in my opinion. So the pitcher that we were most interested in is a 21-year-old out of Duke, Cameron Campbell. Thought that he was a guy who could very well be contributing at the major league level relatively soon. Doesn't look like he's signed quite yet since he hasn't played yet, but loved the fact that it looked like movement will likely be his best trait among the basic pitching ratings, but he's going to be above average in all of them. Already has a major league fastball and sinker, and has the potential to have, in addition to a plus fastball and sinker, an average curve, average-ish slider, and a changeup in the mix also. So like the 5-pitch arsenal, like the fact that he's already throwing in the mid to high 90s. If we were going to go with a pitcher, it was going to be the exorcist, Cameron Campbell. The other guy, and he ended up going 25th to Milwaukee. We're desperately hoping that some of the 2 of the 3 guys that we really like, that one of them would inexplicably fall to us in the second round, and that did not happen. The 12th pick in the draft, the Cardinals took the other player that we were considering. Third base, Luis Gonzalez. Durable, which I like. Really good contact and gap power, and should have plus home run power and be average-ish as far as his eye and avoiding strikeouts. Prototypical third baseman and good work ethic. and enough speed and base running skill that he can make some use of that gap power. Thought he was a real interesting prospect for the 11th pick in the draft, and he was actually who our scout recommended we pick, and he went with the next pick in the draft at number 12, right behind us. So maybe regretting that decision. Would love to hear what the rest of you are thinking on what I should have done among these three players. In the third player, and the guy we ended up going with, was shortstop Israel Coda, also out of Duke, similar to Cameron Campbell. So two of the three players we were looking at coming out of Duke. Israel Coda, normal as far as his injury proneness, good work ethic, which we always like to see. We fell in love with his glove. Not a gold glove major league shortstop, but felt like he is going to be an above average defensive major league shortstop, probably one of the top 10 defensive major league shortstops throughout the course of his career. Don't think he's a perennial gold glove winner with those ratings by any means, but certainly a good, solid defensive major league shortstop. And we also thought that he could hit enough to potentially be a player who would generate some pretty significant WAR. Not a great bat, but if he fully develops, and we hope that he will with that good work ethic and the good coaching that we've put into our minor league system, could be a bit above average in terms of his contact and his gap power, kind of an average home run hitter, average eye, and pretty good at avoiding strikeouts. Not great speed, but enough that he can make a little use of that gap power. So in my view was this is a guy who's kind of a 260, 270 kind of hitter who can probably hit 30, 35 doubles, 5 to 8 triples, and probably 12 to 15 home runs, although in Colorado that number realistically could be closer to 15 to 20 if he really kind of develops that average home run power. So a respectable major league bat with a really good major league glove at shortstop, to me was really attractive, and I ended up going with him. He is definitely not the hitting prospect that Gonzalez is, and clearly there's potential that Cameron Campbell becomes probably not a top of the rotation starter, but could Cameron Campbell be a really good number 2 or number 3 for a decade? Absolutely. My thought with Coda, though, was we've got a plug-and-play shortstop who's really good defensively, who's not going to hurt us offensively, probably starting in a couple of seasons, given that he's 22 years old already. We started him out in rookie ball where he hit just 259 in 7 games. It said he was ready for A-ball when we drafted him, but figured we'd at least give him a week down in rookie ball. And now in A-ball, you can see he's absolutely raking. 345 average, 19 hits, including 6 extra base hits in his first 14 games. So interested in hearing what any of you think. If you've got the time and inclination to comment, would love to hear what you think of Coda versus Gonzalez versus Campbell and the choice that we made. Check in briefly on some of our other top draft picks, just so you know who's come on to the system or into the system. Second round, we got center fielder Jeremy Shavers. Decent hitting prospect, decent speed, good bunter. Don't love that error rating for a potential center fielder. May end up moving him to left or right. With that range and that arm, as a corner outfielder, feel a little better than someone who we're gonna, see running all around the outfield, tracking down balls and then dropping them when he gets close to them is a little depressing for a center fielder. But we did like that bat in the second round. In the third round, we went with a relief pitcher. If you know me, and if you're watching this and you've watched more than a handful of episodes, you know that I'm obsessed with trying to bring starting pitchers into my organization. And I typically try to wait at least till the fourth round on relievers, but felt like Ryan Hood was the best value in the third round, even though he likely is a reliever. Loved that he is durable. Loved the high work ethic and intelligence. Loved that his movement could be off the charts. Really liked that he was a lefty. and certainly profiles as someone who could have an above average slider and changeup and potentially even an above average cutter. So think that that three pitch arsenal for a left handed reliever could work very well. He's also a guy with the 35 stamina. If we wanted to make him a 4 or 5 inning starter, if that cutter developed, we probably could to get more innings out of him. That's not my base case scenario with him, but think that he's a guy who almost certainly will be a nice contributor for us at the major league level a few years down the line. Fourth round, we finally took a starter, Jesus Castro. Not an incredible prospect, but like the durability, like the potential for a 4 or 5 pitch arsenal. He should have the fastball, the curve, and the slider. If the sinker and or changeup develop, that gives him 4 or 5 pitches. Could have plus stuff and plus control. Movement, a little concerned that the peak for that is only going to be average for a major leaguer, so that could be a problem in Colorado. But in the fourth round, kind of felt like even if he does develop completely as expected, and we don't think that that movement is going to play all that well in Colorado, he's probably a guy who has some value that we could look to trade down the line. And for the fourth round, that was kind of the best value that was there. And last guy we'll check in a catcher we picked in the fifth round, Alex Ramos, a guy who good work ethic, a little bit above average in his catcher ability, a little bit below average arm. Looks like he can be a competent-ish major league hitter. The thought here was this is a fifth round pick. This guy could be our backup catcher for, the 6 years of his minimum salary and his arbitration years potentially. Weren't really looking for anything more than that. In the later rounds of the draft, we look to add guys with great personalities, high work ethic, good leadership, intelligence, adaptability, hopefully influence the others around them positively, but probably didn't pick up anyone in those late rounds who's going to be a major contributor. With one exception, we will check in on a player who is already with our number one pick, Israel Coda, at A ball, and that's Mike Strawder, guy who we picked in the 19th round. 23-year-old player who has really good stuff. Question the movement and control. You can see why he lasted till the 19th round. Don't think he's ever a major league player, but a guy with that kind of stuff, with durability still being there in the 19th round. Figured we'd take a flyer on him, even though his personality was nothing special. And he's done really well in Class A Fresno for us so far, 2.77 ERA over 13 innings. And when you look at that Fresno roster and the number of players we have there who really shouldn't even be in A ball, you can see why the addition of somebody like Strawder in the 19th round, didn't think that was the worst thing in the world for us to be doing. So now that we are through international amateur free agency, the All-Star game, and the draft, we'll turn to what we did as we were approaching the trade deadline. And if you looked carefully at the manager's office when we first started this episode, you may have seen that Andres Irazarry, who we have been hoping to trade basically ever since we took over this team about 10 months ago, is still on the roster. He had at one point been willing to waive his no-trade clause. He was no longer willing to do that in the month of July. I don't know if his kids are in school and he didn't want to move or what, but he is still with us. He's signed for $21 million next year. The hope is that we'll be able to get out of that contract this offseason, find someone that we can trade him to free up some even more money to start building this team more in our image this coming off season. But it was a little disappointing that we were not able to move on from him. And we have a similar story with Emmanuel Johnson, 36, soon to be 37-year-old, making $18 million this year, final year of his season. We're absolutely hoping to trade him also, but he, with his 10-5 rights, refused to play ball as we got further along in the season, and nowhere in the month of July was willing to go anywhere. So he's having a nice year for us, 298 average, 23 homers, and 399 at-bats. But he is wrecked physically. We've got him on the IL right now. I'm just trying to be as cautious as possible with him. He did come to us a few weeks ago and say that he wanted an extension, and he was looking for, I think, around $10 million. Yeah, $10.5 million a year. He is a very popular player locally, so there's an argument to try to keep him around, but I just don't think I can afford to do it. He's going to be 37 next year. He's wrecked physically. He's a very nice bat, and he's had a really nice career with the Rockies. 297 career hitter with 333 homers, over 1,200 ribbies, WAR of 55 for his career. You know, he's getting to the point where if he's able to kind of continue playing the way that he's played for another 4 or 5 seasons, you could start talking about him as a Hall of Famer. I don't know with his health and his age whether that's actually going to happen. The thing I am also a little disappointed about with him, though, and the fact that he wasn't willing to waive his 10-5 rights, is that he is going to be a compensation-eligible free agent. But given that he's only looking for about $10.5 million a year for 3 years, if we offer him a qualifying offer at close to $19 million for a year, he'll certainly take it. And I don't really want him back, and I certainly don't want him back at that kind of money. So we're going to end up not getting any draft pick compensation for him, unfortunately. But those are the rights that he had as a 10-5 player, unfortunately, for us. So the 2 guys that I was really hoping to get rid of will not be able to get rid of, and was not able to get rid of before the trade deadline, unfortunately. But to the trades that we did make, and we made 3 of them as we got closer to the trade deadline, and you do know that one of them doesn't include an all-star that I haven't told you about. That was not Oscar Altamirano, 33-year-old who we had signed as a minor league free agent. Spent most of his time with us down in AAA, but then at one point we had our starting left fielder, center fielder, right fielder, and 5th outfielder from when we started this season and broke camp, all on the injured list at the same time. So he ended up coming up in the month of July for us. When we started getting a little healthier, towards the end of the month, he refused to go down to AAA. So rather than just releasing him, we figured we would try to get what we could for him. We got a minor league left-handed pitcher, Jaden Thornton, in return. He's been in AA for us, started just 3 games down there, and hasn't been good for us, although he was really good in AA in the Houston system. Given that he's an extreme fly ball pitcher with below average movement, I don't think he's someone that we're ever going to have in Colorado, but do think that as a 23-year-old left-handed pitcher who can potentially start or relieve, probably has a little bit of trade value down the line, and felt like we'll be able to flip him at some point in the future for someone more valuable than a 33-year-old center fielder like Oscar Altamirano. So rather than just let him go for nothing, we got what we could for him, and was actually surprised how well we did. But I think the most interesting thing we did was what ended up being a swap of Willie Soltero for Ethan Mingo. But we'll talk about how we got there. And Willie Soltero, our former closer, was our 6th All-Star this year. And this is the one that blew my mind, because you'll see he was 4-6 with 4 saves and an 8.42 ERA in Colorado. His numbers were actually a little better than this before the All-Star break, but his ERA was still in the 7s. He hasn't been closing for us. I do not understand how he was named an All-Star here in 2049 with those statistics. It blows my mind. I don't get it. I think that, I know some of you have commented in the past, most notably Three Quarters Badger, how the Hall of Fame voting algorithm seems broken at times in this game, and I am starting to agree with that. I think the All-Star voting And it, excuse me, it won't even be voting with a relief pitcher. It will be likely just the selection process of the AI in the game that a middle reliever with an ERA in the sevens ends up as an all-star was just shocking to me. The only thing I can think of is that he had been a closer last year for us, previous years for Minnesota, as you can see, and he is extremely popular, so maybe the popularity factored in somehow, but a reliever, a middle reliever with an ERA in the sevens is an all-star, just absolutely blew my mind. And he is a guy who is making about $4.5 million, and his arbitration next year was going to be over $5 million. Is a middle reliever, closing in on his 30s, who only has average movement. Didn't feel like he was a great long-term fit for Colorado. And while we were trying to primarily be sellers as we approached the trade deadline, I did kind of try to look for anyone who could potentially help us. So at the same time, I was thinking about maybe trading Soltero off of that wacky all-star appearance, given that we didn't expect to bring him back at over $5 million next year. Found that Ethan Mingo, a former pitcher of ours with the Pirates, was available on the trade block from the Dodgers or the Angels, and they weren't asking for all that much for him. He was also in the last year of his contract making similar money to Soltero, also a right-handed reliever, a couple years older, admittedly, but you look at his profile, you look at the 70 movement, you look at he's a ground ball pitcher who throws in the mid to high 90s, like the work ethic, and he's a pitcher who, when he was with us in Pittsburgh, had 280, 335, and 368 ERAs, a guy who can also start in a pinch, although when I was GM of Pittsburgh, we primarily used him as a reliever. So he was in the final year of his contract, but my thought was that if we could get him for basically nothing, and they were just looking for garbage for him, we got rid of a guy who had a bad personality. They just wanted to get his contract off the books, and you can see they gave us cash in return. I still don't really understand the rationale, but my hope was that we could bring him on board and then immediately trade Soltero to open up the roster spot that we needed for him, because we kind of getting short on spots on our pitching staff, and we also had a couple of our starters who had missed large chunks of the season who were going to be coming back soon. So the thought was that we're not going to pay Soltero $5 million next year, so we took what we could get for him, which was a little bit of cash, middling 24-year-old second base prospect, and a minor league reliever to just give us a little more depth in the minors, since our minor league pitching is dreadful at some levels. But we bring Mingo on board, and then while we've got him as a captive, we try to sign him for a contract less than the $5 million that we were going to be paying Soltero next year. The thought being that Mingo's a better pitcher, and a better pitcher for Coors with that great movement and his ground ball pitching. And we did end up getting him signed at $4.3 million a year for the next 4 years, with the final year being a team option. So we thought that it's not a revolutionary trade to end up going from one middle reliever to another, but the fact that I think we upgraded, got a guy who's better for our park, and we've now got him signed for the next 4 years at less money, that helped make up for the fact that we had to trade away the extremely popular Willie Soltero, which did end up hurting us a bit as far as our fan interest. So that's kind of the summary of the big stuff that we did. You can see that fan interest is down to a 75 at this point. We started the season at a 97, so some of the guys we've traded away hurt us a little bit, and then there's been a pretty material amount of attrition in that number just from our mediocre performance on the field. Still should generate more revenue this year than next year, which will be positive. Taking a look at ownership, happy with the addition of all-star catcher Gonzalez, Happy that we extended all-star first baseman Jamal Cohen. Happy in terms of next year's goals that we've increased attendance. But they're unhappy that we're not playing 500 ball. But I think given the amount of injuries we've had this year and the fact that we just weren't trying exceedingly hard to win, we basically just wanted to get to know this team and be able to go into next season with a plan on how to change the roster. I feel like at 60 and 66, we're really not in a bad place. Taking a look at how we've gotten there, one game over 500 in May, and we were flat at 500 in both June and July. 2 games under thus far in August, but we still have the number 1 offense in the National League. Thank you, Coors. And we still have the worst pitching in the National League, 15th. Thank you also, Coors. You can see we've scored 726 runs and allowed 693. So our Pythagorean record of 66 and 60 is actually the complete opposite of where we are. So we've actually had a little bit of bad luck. Would love to get the record up over to 500, up to 500, and make ownership at least pleased with us from that perspective. I don't think we're going to get there, though, but we did earlier this month get both Stephen Moore and Jordan Medrano back off of the IL. So now at this point, for the first time really since the early stage of the season, with Vargas, Eritzeri, Moore, and Medrano, we do have our top 4 starters intact for this final month and a half of the season. So my thought is that we should be a little better, hopefully, over this final month and a half, final 36 games of the season, with our top 4 starters all healthy. You can see that Tyrone Colbert, who we brought on in that trade, is our closer right now. Juan Bin Daoud has been moved and demoted to a setup role. I do think that Colbert is someone who down the line would think about as a starter again also. You can see he did start 5 games for us in the month of July primarily when we brought him on board, but with Moore and Medrano getting healthy over the last couple of weeks, that moved him into the bullpen. But I don't want to say it's unlikely that we'll have Eritzeri back because we're going to have to get him to waive that no trade clause, but assuming we're able to get out from the Eritzeri contract, that's going to open up at least one spot in the rotation for us next year, which Colbert could conceivably fill for us. So that, in a nutshell, is what happened in the month of July and early August and where we stand right now. 60 and 66, we are 3rd in the NL West. We're actually 9 out for the wild card. Just feel like I should point that out. I don't think we are a realistic competitor for the wild card. My real goal with this team is to, I'd say, stay within 6 games of 500. I wouldn't want to be any worse than this. I would think that hopefully with our starting pitching the most intact that it's been since opening day, would love to play 500 ball the rest of the way or better. So would like to be within 6 games of 500 and would certainly like to hang on to being 3rd in the NL West, which we only have a half-game tenuous lead over the Diamondbacks at this time. So I know those are not ambitious goals for us, but I think that they are somewhat realistic, and we will find out how we are able to do in achieving those goals in our next episode when we finish up the regular season. So thank you so much for watching. If you are still listening and watching, appreciate any thoughts on what we've done, what we should have done, what you would have done differently down below. And until our next episode, hope you have a great day, and thank you for watching.